I want to take another moment to discuss issues around time as far as changing and growing ourselves. So, again, I've commented that we're human beings. Being is a verb that has to do with our experience of time from now into the present. And one of the things that, as we talk more about meaning in life and existentialism and what it means to be, we'll talk about how time actually affects our freedom. That said, we're going to look now at five different kind of time frames to really discuss how each of those will affect your ability to change over time. And the first one is the most minute split second, right, from this moment into the next. And what we know from neuropsychologists is that our brain, every moment, has millions of synapses. There's so many things happening, most of which are below our conscious thoughts. Now, those unconscious actual synapses can affect our physiology and our emotions in a number of ways. If we just go ahead and notice a thought coming into our mind and letting it go, often it has a very minimal impact. Often, though, if the thought has to do with fight or flight, or something that's otherwise important to us, we latch onto it and hold it. And the longer that we hold on to that thought, what we're essentially doing is reinforcing that synapse. So, what I would encourage you just to consider is a thought in itself isn't a good or a bad thing, it's just a thing. And at some point in your brain, it determined that this particular thought would be helpful. It's meant to help you in some way. We'll come back to that in a moment. Next, once an emotion is triggered, most emotions have a physiological correlate. There's a chemical cascade, right? So, for instance, if something scares you and you have a bit of an adrenaline rush, you'll typically feel the experiences of that from 10 to 20 minutes. Now, depending on other physiological effects, so like perhaps if your amygdala has been worn out, then it might last longer. However, for most people in most situations, so you imagine you're taking a walk and you see a stick, you think it's a snake, you'll jump, your heart rate will elevate, 10 to 15, 20 minutes, it should pass. However, if all emotions are greedy, and one of the things that they do is they want to reinforce themselves, and your mind will start to want to perseverate on it. As the wise part of your own mind, you can choose to observe that that was just a stick and to use skills to kind of break that greedy emotion cycle. Next, if you ever noticed if a person has a severe psych issue and they're put in a psychiatric hospital, they're typically put on a hold for 48 or 72 hours. There's an immense amount of research behind this. So imagine a person's at risk of hurting themselves. That almost always has to do with a severe emotional experience, something terrifying happened to them. They might have an intense sense of loneliness, they might be suicidal, whatever. Statistically, the intensity of that will break down between 24 and 36 hours. So a 48 to 72 hour period gives a person to re-regulate and be able to come back to their normal home, environment, workplace, whatever that may be. Next, and this fourth one is really fascinating and I don't think it's spoken of enough. A long time ago, I was reading a book about how to help really, really difficult situations, difficult clients. And what it talked about was the use of using hypnosis and hypnotic suggestion in therapy. And while I'm not a hypnotherapist, I'm not necessarily suggesting to use those, what it did talk about was that the use of suggestion and takes between 10 and 14 days for change to go from the conscious to the unconscious mind. And so what that suggests is once you start to do the work to make whatever change in your life, expect to give yourself 2 weeks to really notice the flowering of it, right? So oftentimes people will start to use like, let's say gratitude. And the next thing they know is they're like, well, how come this hasn't really changed? But if they give it a couple weeks, they'll start to notice that they feel quite a lot better. Now, the last one is how long does it take to build a habit? Often it's said that it takes 21 days to build a habit, or research says it might take 66 to almost a year. Regardless, there's a point of building a behavior into the structure of your life and then following through with it. The goal of the habit is to make it automatic. Now, I'm going to follow this up with another video talking about the use of using behavioral skills to impact and affect habits and learning.